Can you share what it was that kind of got you into someone who focuses on boys and men and healthy masculinity?
Yeah. It's a funny question because I think that maybe it's not a funny question, but I had two engaged, loving parents who also had two children when they were very young, who I think were growing up themselves when they had young kids. And with my father, at least, like that weight of responsibility, I know I got that from him because I know that he talked to me about like what it was like to be 24 and have two young kids and try to make things work, but I think that, I had this really close relationship with my dad in the sense I was almost like his shadow. I would follow him around and do things. And so in some ways, it's not surprising that I would go into psychology because he was a psychologist. And my parents always said, like, in a way, do whatever you want to do, right? But to me, I feel like the die was cast at a young age. But my early exposure was in women's studies and feminism and gender studies. And I feel like, honestly, as a early professional, I was a school counselor, and I focused much more on girls and their moms, honestly. But I think when I began to see clients myself and kind of my clinical training in my PhD program, I began to work with men. Super enjoyed it. Found that I could relate to their stories. I found in some ways like the work wasn't that hard, if that makes sense, like because I knew the narrative. And I would have guys who came in acute distress, who were contemplating kind of harming themselves or killing themselves, who weren't coming in for preventative work, right? They were coming in with 5-alarm fires, and but they would stay with me and they would stay engaged in individual or group work, and they would emerge a much better person. And I found that really rewarding. As I began to look around, I kind of recognized that there were so few people out there who seemed to maybe understand the world of masculinities, and yet there was this incredible amount of men and boys who needed help, who in a way weren't getting what they needed. So in that area, it's like I as much as I always say, like, I had a good relationship with my dad, I think it was also complicated. Like as I got older and I learned more about him and his life, I had a lot more empathy for the drive that he felt he had to have to provide for people. I feel like he was a workaholic. What I consider loneliness, I consider him to probably be a guy who probably didn't have a lot of friends. And yet I think he craved them and people liked him a lot. But his inner world, it felt to me, was unexpressed. And I think in some ways, as much as people think I'm my dad's shadow, and my dad passed away about 6 years ago. And as much as I feel like, I'm in his shadow, I feel like in many ways I live my life to not be like him. To kind of carry myself in a different kind of way, and to be like, I grew up in a family that heritage-wise was Swedish, and so there was a bit of stoicism around it, around like you took care of yourself, you got stuff done. And even though my dad was a psychologist, I always felt like he wasn't terribly emotional. So I learned to get stuff done. But I realized that I wanted to have a much more emotionally connected life.